Welcome, guys, back to the Grateful Living podcast. Today, I'm thankful to have Guy Kawasaki with me. Guy is the Chief Evangelist at Canva and has been since 2014. He is also a podcast host for the Remarkable People podcast, which has featured people such as Jane Goodall, Angela Duckworth, Ariana Huffington, and many more. Guy is also known for working for Apple two different times, first as a software evangelist from 1983 to 1987, and then as their chief evangelist from 1995 to 1997. Guy is the author of 15 books. His latest books are Wise Guy, Lessons from Life, and The Art of the Start 2.0. Guy, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course, of course. It's an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you. Thankful to have you on. For people that don't know you as well, can you take us back to the beginning a little bit?
The beginning of time?
Of your time, where you grew up, your family situation,
Sure.
what type of kid you were, things like that.
Selective memory here, but I was born and raised in Honolulu, Hawaii. I come from a lower middle class family. I went to school up through high school in Hawaii, and then I went to the mainland to Stanford. After Stanford, I went to law school for 2 weeks and quit. And then I went back to Hawaii, worked for the Lieutenant Governor of Hawaii for about 6 months, then went back to the mainland to go to UCLA in the MBA program. While I was there, I started working for a jewelry manufacturer. That is the company I eventually went to work for after my MBA. I stayed there about 4 years, and then I got recruited into Apple as Apple's second software evangelist. My job was to convince software and hardware companies to create Mac products. After that, I left to start a tech firm, and then I returned to Apple as Apple's chief evangelist, and then I left again to start another tech firm, and that's it. And about 8 years ago, Canva reached out to me. So I've been Canva's chief evangelist for about 8 years. And so today I'm Canva's chief evangelist, and I have a podcast called the Remarkable People podcast.
Yeah, awesome. I saw that you are a third generation from Japan. How much did your Japanese background shape you?
Well, seemingly simple question. Definitely there were values taught about filial piety and, taking the high road, noblesse oblige, not that that's a French term, and the value of school and education. Having said that, I will also tell you that if you were Japanese American, third generation, I was born in 1954. So kind of right after World War II, at that point, the Japanese Americans in Hawaii, anyway, were trying to prove that they are good Americans. And so if you're trying to prove that you're good Americans, you don't necessarily try to preserve your old culture. You're trying to show that you're American, not Japanese. Mm. So certainly there are some cultural values, but I wasn't, hardcore Japanese nationalistic upbringing at all. I'm just as American as, I was going to say Donald Trump, but that's not a good example.
Yeah. I guess one aspect that you mentioned was growing up lower middle class, and
yes.
You ended up going to a private high school. I'm curious, as you look back at that period of time, do you have any pieces of advice? I mean, I don't know if you felt self-conscious being, in an environment where your classmates may have come from wealthier families, and how you navigated that.
Well, so I went to a private boys' school, and it's co-ed now, but I went to a private boys' school, college prep in Hawaii. And Hawaii has a public school system and a private school system. The private school system is more academically oriented, college prep. And, I have to say that there were some people, in fact, probably most people were from wealthier families than mine, but I never felt like, I'm the oppressed poor person. We didn't have a lot of money, but I didn't know we didn't have a lot of money. And I didn't know that, there are rich and famous lifestyles. Now, I wasn't completely ignorant of that, but I basically took lemons and made lemonade. So I'll tell you a few stories. So I was hijacked for my lunch money twice on a public bus system. And once a friend of the family took me for a ride in a Porsche. And, a lot of people, when you ask them what motivated you when you're young, they say, I want to dent the universe. I want to make the world a better place. I want to change the world. I'll tell you what, I just wanted to change the car. And so after I was robbed, I said to myself, guy, you got to live in a better part of town. And then I got this ride in this Porsche, and I said, guy, you have got to be able to buy a Porsche someday. So those three things really motivated me. I kid you not. And, insipid and shallow and materialistic and just et cetera, as those stories may sound, that's the God's honest truth, man. That really motivated me.
Yeah, yeah. You made it to Stanford, as you talk about. In your book, you talk about not traveling and, graduating within 3 years as being some of the things you look back on. Is there any other piece of advice that you would give in terms of taking advantage of your undergrad?
So I graduated from Stanford in 3.5 years. And as you said, I never went to a Stanford overseas campus, because at that time, Stanford had Stanford London, Stanford Japan, Stanford Italy, I don't know, wherever. But I never did that because I wanted to get through school as fast as possible. That was a big mistake. And so if any of you are out there in college and you have the opportunity to go to an overseas campus, by all means go, because this may be the last time in your life where you can do that. So, it ain't happening again. And by the time you're wealthy enough to do it, you're going to have too many responsibilities. You'll be too tired. You may not have your health. So do it now while while you're young. And I would also say advice for college students is I think many people have this desire to find the perfect first job, because it's going to determine the success and happiness of the rest of your life. And I would say that nothing is further from the truth, that your first job, you'll be lucky if you remember your first job. My first job was counting diamonds. So, did I see a path where counting diamonds would lead me to working for Apple, which would lead me to entrepreneurship, which would lead me to writing and speaking, which would lead me to Canva, which would lead me to podcasting? Not at all. There was no plan like that. And so my first job, counting diamonds in college, in the summers, I was a truck driver's helper for a construction company. So we would drop off the materials to build a house. I wasn't interning at Goldman Sachs. You know what I'm saying? And I wasn't interning at McKinsey, and I wasn't starting a not-for-profit foundation so they'd have a college essay. So I guess the what I'm trying to cut this down to is chillax about your first job, man. It in the long run, especially for people who are getting in the job market today, over the course of their careers, they're probably going to have 10 jobs. And so, trying to thread the needle and worrying obsessively about the first job being perfect, it ain't going to be perfect. Just get over it. Just go for it.
Yeah, no, that's a great piece of advice. So you went to UC Davis for 2 weeks, and then you quit.
Yep.
I'm curious, how tough was that mentally? Did you feel like a failure telling your friends and family?
Well, certainly I felt like a failure. I truly felt like I let my family down. I thought my father was going to tell me to commit suicide. But he basically said, son, it's okay. And as long as you make something of yourself and of your life by your mid-20s. So he gave me 5 more years to do something significant. And, I never expected that answer. And thank God I got that answer. So I just hated law school. They were trying to just, I just couldn't take the pressure of law school. And for me, being a good Asian American, that's the first time I quit anything in my life. So, one of the fears I think people have of quitting is that you're going to be a loser for the rest of your life. And it's a slippery slope. So you quit law school, then you quit this, then you quit that. And, 50 years later, you're a loser. I don't think quitting like anything is necessarily going to be the slippery slope that ruins your life. Now, if you start quitting everything, yeah, you probably will end up a loser. But, one data point doth not make, well, a line or a plane.
Yeah, no, that's true. You then, as you said, took some time, went back to Hawaii, and then came back to UCLA to do your MBA. I'm curious, as you look back on that time, is there any advice you would give to current students on making the most of the MBA experience?
Well, see, that was such a different time. Okay, so it's hard to draw lessons from my life, because back in the 80s, 1980, not 1880, back in the 1980s when I got my MBA, getting an MBA was a legitimate fence or barrier you had to jump over. So you distinguished yourself from people who merely had BAs and BSs by having an MBA. And so, if you wanted to go to work for large companies like McKinsey or Goldman or, whatever, then you had to have an MBA. That was just it. I don't think that's true today. And so I don't think you can say from my life, well, guy would not be successful as an entrepreneur, as a podcaster, as a writer, speaker, blah, 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 if he didn't have his MBA. I cannot tell you that I believe that the MBA in my career path was a humongous factor. And in tech in particular, I will tell you that, well, I'm out of touch because I haven't, obviously interviewed or anything for a while, but I would say in most tech firms, an MBA is neutral to negative. It's definitely not, oh my God, he went to Harvard, he has an MBA, he's on the fast track or she's on the fast track. I don't think that's true. That may be true in Goldman and McKinsey and Accenture and Bain and BCG. It's not true in tech firms.
Yeah. You talked about a little bit, but your job after your MBA, you were working in the diamond and fine jewelry industry.
Yes.
You talk about in your book learning a lot about sales, and
yes.
I'm curious. I found, as we're talking, obviously most people, whether they're undergrad business students or MBAs, they try to go after the Goldman Sachs and things of that nature. And you had a very positive experience working for a smaller firm. And curious if you could just talk about that.
Well, so I am one data point, right? And for all I know, I'm the only data point. And there may be millions of other people who said, going to Goldman Sachs and Accenture or BCG or Bain or, McKinsey was the best thing I ever did. So with that caveat that I am a mere data point, my problem with going into finance is that, what it's going to come off harsher than I want it to, but like, how are you making the world a better place by being in private equity? How are you making the world a better place by figuring out derivatives? You could honestly, I think you could apply that to a lot of the cyber currencies right now. How are you making the world a better place? And so that's my issue with finance. And my issue with consulting is that, like, what makes you think you're qualified to tell companies how to run when you've never run a company? When, you went to Yale for your undergrad and you went to Harvard for your MBA, and you studied a lot of case studies, but now you're going to tell an entrepreneur or a company owner or a large company, this is how you should run your company. Based on what? Based on you reading cases? I don't think so. So, and I would, going back a little bit, also when the finance diatribe, I would say that especially applies to venture capital. Venture capital is something you should do at the end of your career, not at the beginning. And one of the value adds that venture capitalists should add is experience and wisdom and been there and done that to younger entrepreneurs who have not done it and not been there and not done that. So if you went to Yale as an undergrad and then you went to Harvard for your MBA and now you're a venture capitalist, like, when have you had to raise money? When have you had to hire people? When have you had to ship a product? When have you had to pull back a product? When have you had to apologize for the bugs in your product? When have you had to fire people? Never. You've been studying your whole life. So how can you possibly be a venture capitalist?
Yeah, all good points. After that, you spent a year at Edgeware Services. You talk about being very grateful for this tech company to allow you to break into the tech sector. I'm curious, obviously you've worked at Apple and, now Canva. If there is someone out there struggling with breaking into the tech sector, what would your advice be?
Yeah, sure. So just to put some meat on those bones, basically I was in the jewelry business. I got an Apple II. I fell in love with Apple II. And I wanted to get into tech, right? Because, the jewelry business is a beautiful personal business. I learned a lot about selling in that business, but it wasn't a high flying growth business. There are only so many fingers and necks and ears in the world. And so I wanted to get into tech. I just fell in love with computing. But let's just, to put it mildly, even with an MBA, but I was an MBA who'd worked in the jewelry business, no tech firm would touch me. Not the smallest firm, nobody, until I found one company in Agoura Hills, California called Edgeware Services. And the reason why they hired me was on the way to CES or Comdex, their director of marketing got in a car accident. So he was indisposed for a few months. And so that created a vacancy. And so that's how I got into the software business. And so, what's the lesson there? The lesson is that I would say, don't be proud that, so in a perfect world, you would get a Google internship and then they would make you an offer and you'd be on the fast track at Google, Microsoft, Apple, Cisco, Yahoo. Well, maybe not Yahoo, Pinterest, Facebook. Well, maybe not Facebook anymore, but you get my drift, right? Yeah. So, and so you want this perfect starting job with this perfect title at this perfect company. Well, my advice to you is just get your foot in the door. I mean, take an extreme. If you get hired at Google to work in their fitness center, take the freaking job. I'm telling you, just take the freaking job. You can look at your life and say, okay, I'm going to work in the Google Fitness Center. This means that I'm going to keep the weights racked and I'm going to, apply disinfectant to the dumbbells after the real employees work. Or you could say, hey, I got my foot into the door at Google. I'm actually training the executive vice president of marketing. And so I have gotten to know her. And I have, impressed her with my intelligence. So she asked me to come in and interview for a marketing job. Just get your ass in there and, worry about the rest later.
Yeah. After that, you moved on to Apple. Obviously, given the hindsight of time and the 2000s and, how well, Apple has become. I'm curious, when you first joined and were interacting with Steve Jobs, did you feel like he would become the revolutionary?
There was never any doubt that Steve Jobs was unique. Never. I mean, from the moment you met him, you knew this guy he had a different operating system. Now, clearly he got fired, but he came back and I just, he's off the scale. He was off the scale. There's never been anybody like him. And maybe there never will be another person like him. You could make the case that Elon Musk is the closest thing to Steve Jobs, except Elon Musk is like, man, he's like getting bizarre these days. So, He, you knew sometimes in life you meet people, and if you put your ego aside, you can say to yourself, that guy or that gal, she is just on a different plane. She has a different operating system. She's a bird, and I'm a freaking, pig in the mud. And that's what I felt. Steve Jobs was a very intimidating person. I literally was scared of him humiliating me, which motivated me to do some of the best work of my life.
Yeah. I'm curious, there's a lot of negativity given towards the amount of hours employees had to work and things of that nature.
Where?
At Apple.
Yeah. When?
During that time period of,
yeah.
I'm curious if you felt, if you felt like you wanted to quit at points, or how did you, like,
Nope.
4 years, the mental fortitude.
I don't know who you're getting this information from, but I don't know of anybody who was in the Macintosh division who regrets it and who wanted to quit because, it was like working 60 hours a week or 80 hours a week or whatever. I don't know anybody like that. And in fact, I would say that is one of those experiences that you should be so lucky to have worked for Steve Jobs in the Macintosh division, or a Steve Jobs in a Macintosh division once in your life. So, yes, the hours were long. Steve was brutal, et cetera, et cetera. But if somebody ever tells you that and they're speaking from firsthand experience, then ask them, well, so do you regret doing it? Do you wish you had not gone through that experience? And I would be astounded if they said yes. In a sense, it's like, to use an athletic metaphor, there have been some very, very hard-ass successful coaches, Bobby Knight at Indiana, Vince Lombardi, Green Bay Packers, who, I'm dating myself, most people are saying, who the hell is he talking about? But let's just say they were
the Super Bowl trophy is still named after him. So everyone should know that.
Yeah. So, there have been some hard ass coaches, and you think, oh, it must have been terrible playing for him. He ran you until you fainted from exertion. He didn't give you water, and he abused you and humiliated you, and he made you play through injury, and he demanded 365 dedication to the sport. Yeah. On the other hand, you won Super Bowl titles, and I bet you if you asked players who played for Vince Lombardi, none of them would say, I regret that. I wish I played for a coach, or I wish I was a student of a teacher who was easy on me, who I could bullshit, who I could get away with crap.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm just curious because you have a lot better insight, and those of us that grew up or were born later don't have this. Obviously, we see the movies and things like that. I'm curious, like, in terms of, that was such a pivotal time that you were there, 83, Wozniak left.
Wozniak has never left. To this day, he's an Apple employee.
Okay. And then, I got that wrong. In 85, I believe Scully was hired, and 85, Jobs resigned. I guess in terms of the leadership and how things were, are there anything else that comes to mind when you think about that time period?
Well, I guess I learned several things. One is, just because you have a better product doesn't mean you're going to win, because Macintosh was a better product. That's lesson number one. Lesson number two is, nothing's easy. It was not easy. Lesson three is, things are never as good or as bad as they seem. And they weren't as bad, I thought, when they were bad. And they weren't as good, I thought, when people thought it was just great. So, now admittedly, I was inside the reality distortion field, but, I had to lay people off. I was lucky I was never laid off, And I suffered some PTSD from working at Apple, but I would not trade that experience for anything. I'm telling you, it's just like playing for Vince Lombardi or Bobby Knight and, maybe Elon Musk. I don't know what Elon Musk employees think.
Yeah. In your personal life, you ended up meeting your wife during this time period.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, do you have any, pieces of advice on love to the single people out there?
Well, listen, again, this is 1986 that I met her. And let's just say that I'm not sure what I did with her would be legal today. Because, you're definitely dating somebody in the company, right? So I would say having relationships. Now, we were never in sort of the same organization, so there was no path in which I was her supervisor or all that. So, I'm not talking about Me Tooism, okay, here. I'm just saying that I think in today's companies, it's pretty much frowned upon that you date anybody in the company, right?
Yeah.
And I dated somebody and married somebody, and I'm still married to a woman I met at work. So, I'm on wife 1.0. I'm a lucky guy.
Yeah. After that, you started some, ACS as the CEO,
Mm-hmm.
and, began the trip to entrepreneurship. I'm curious, do you have any advice on leaving a job and timing of that and
Yeah.
how to make that
Well,
decision? I'm sure
no,
that wasn't easy.
it wasn't easy, and I'm not sure I did the right thing. But, I left Apple twice, 87 and 97. And after 97, I saw Steve a few years later, and he offered me another job, and I turned him down. So, I turned down or left Apple 3 times. If I had not done that any one of those 3 times, I would have made a boatload of money. So, one of the lessons you can take from my life is that sometimes the grass is not greener. And what you should do is you should fertilize and water the grass you're standing on. Now, there was nobody at the company in 1987 or 1997 who, quote unquote, knew that Apple would be $1 trillion company. Nobody. And if anybody tells you that they knew Apple would be $1 trillion company, they are lying. They are pathological, delusional liars. Nobody knew that. So that's some comfort. But it's not clear to me that trying to optimize a job switch every year or 2 is the optimal path.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I guess I'm curious, also saw in 93 to 95, you were in a business. Is there any major piece of advice that you think of when you think of entrepreneurship or the lessons you learned from those 2?
Well, I literally wrote the book on entrepreneurship. It's called The Art of the Start, version 2. So if any of you are entrepreneurs and you need a single book that really covers all the topics you're going to face: product development, recruiting, sales and marketing, finance, HR, everything is in that book. I meant it as, this is the single volume you need to buy. Now, there are a lot of great books that dedicate 200 pages to the minimum viable product, right? So obviously, but I dedicate 20 pages to that concept, but I cover 10 or 15 concepts. So I think the most important advice I can give an entrepreneur listening to this is the business of an entrepreneur is to create customers. It's not to raise money. It's not to, quote, dent the universe. It's not to do all that kind of stuff. Your job is to create customers. And if you create customers, you probably will dent the universe. You probably will be able to raise money, and you probably will profit from it. But the key is it's all about the creation of customers. And that I stole from Peter Drucker, actually.
Yeah. In 1993, I believe you became a parent for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, how did fatherhood change you, and do you have any
Yeah.
advice for people that?
Well, I think that parenthood, I have 4 children now, is the best single thing that ever happened to me. All the fun, all the material things, et cetera, are nothing compared to the joy that my children have brought me. Nothing. There's not even close to the joy that my kids have brought me.
Yeah. I'm curious. You talk about it in your book, but uh, adoption was a
Mm-hmm.
part of your process for,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, I guess. Do you have any words of advice or
Well,
education that you want to give to anybody considering
well,
adoption?
I think adoption is one of the most beautiful things in the world. That to um, help children who might not have had the life and the opportunity were they not adopted is a beautiful thing. Having biological children is a beautiful thing too, but adoption is, it's got that different sort of perspective that you're taking someone who would have struggled, would have had a difficult life, and giving them a better life. But I will tell you, so, right now you're thinking, okay, guys, so you did the kid a favor or you did the kids a favor. But I tell you, I've come to believe that the adoptive parents benefit as much as the adoptive kids. There's no question in my mind.
Yeah. Do you feel like, I don't know if you ever had this conversation, that your kids ever felt pressure to live up to your level of success?
I have never had that conversation. I have never pressed that issue. I have never, pushed them to go into tech or go into podcasting or go into writing or go into whatever. I am not a tiger dad. Uh, I mean, there are certain lines you can cross with me. Don't get me wrong, but I am not a tiger dad who, wants their preschool kid to be taking calculus and start a foundation by the age of 10 and be a concert pianist, whatever, celloist, flutist, flautist, violinist, whatever. Uh, I'm just not that way. Maybe it's because I'm third generation. Maybe by the time you're third generation, you lose your edge. Fourth generation, you have no edge. But so I'm not like that. I think if your kids are productive and healthy and pursuing something of value, and it could be a value to them, not necessarily to you, that's as good as it gets. And you don't have to go to Yale for me. You don't have to get an MBA, prestigious job or anything. If you're healthy and happy, I'd say that's more than anybody can wish for.
Yeah. As you mentioned before, you came back to Apple in '95. Is there anything about that time period that you'd like to talk about?
Well, when I came back to Apple, Apple was supposed to die. I came back to preserve the Macintosh cult. So, again, the lesson is, things weren't as bad as they seemed if you were on the outside. And I really loved Apple. And so I came back, and I hope I helped Apple survive. That's what I did. I maintained the Macintosh cult. And that's been, maybe not financially, but it's been certainly one of the most rewarding jobs, because I look at what Apple has become, and I had a part of that.
Yeah, yeah. After that, you started, I think, what became Garage Technology Ventures eventually.
Yep.
Is there anything from that? I think that was '98 to
Well, Garage
2008.
Technology Ventures, what we were trying to do is democratize venture capital so that you didn't have to be a venture capitalist to invest in startups. We're also trying to help the startup, because there's only so many venture capitalists and they do only so many deals. So there are lots of potential investors and lots of potential entrepreneurs. We try to be the market in the middle. And it was moderately successful. I wouldn't say, it was a home run. And it was a very interesting time. But, one of the themes in my life is I like to democratize things. So arguably, Macintosh democratized computers. Garage tried to democratize investment. Canva certainly has democratized design, where you no longer have to buy Photoshop or Illustrator, and you don't have to depend on professional designers or professional design department or stuff like that. You can roll your own. And so is a consistent theme in my life that I like to democratize things.
Yeah. And then after that, I believe is Canva as the chief evangelist. I'm curious. Evangelist isn't a term that I've personally seen a lot of. Do you think it should be more of a role at companies?
Well, first of all, where are you?
I'm in Boston.
Okay. So evangelism comes from a Greek word meaning bringing the good news. So an evangelist brings the good news. I brought the good news of Macintosh, making people more creative and productive. I'm bringing the good news of Canva, making you a better communicator because it empowers you to be a talented artist. So that's what evangelism does. And I was the second software evangelist. So it may be literally true. I'm the second secular evangelist in the world. The first was Mike Boych. And so I think it's a legitimate function if you have a great product or service that is good news. My only hesitation with the term now is that I hope people keep straight that evangelism is different from evangelical, right? Because today in America, anyway, evangelical stands for Trumpist, degradation of women's rights, gerrymandering. I mean, you name it, right? And so that nothing could be further from my desires than to do any of those kind of things. So I hesitate because people may not make the differentiation between evangelical and evangelistic.
Yeah. Canva's found a lot of success being a unicorn and things of that nature. As someone involved in their leadership, how do you not put pressure on yourself and to do even crazier growth or things of that nature? How is that viewed?
I've been there 8 years. I am primarily outward focused. So truly the credit for Canva belongs to, well, in one sense, every Canva employee, but in another sense, Melanie and Cameron and the Cliff. I mean, Cliff, Melanie, and Cameron, they deserve the credit. So I like to call this Guy's Golden Touch. Some people think, oh, Guy's Golden Touch is whatever Guy touches turns to gold. So Guy touches Canva, it turns to gold. That's not at all what I mean. Guy's Golden Touch is whatever's gold Guy touches. And so Canva was rock solid 24 karat gold. So I touched it.
Yeah. Speaking is something you've been doing for a long time now. I think you do over 50 keynote
I used to.
speeches a year.
Yep.
How did you become such a good speaker and engaging speaker where people wanted to always hire you?
Listen, first of all, when you work for Steve Jobs, it's very intimidating that you think, no one can possibly speak as well as he can. So listen, just like everybody else, I had a tremendous fear of public speaking. And what turned the corner for me was the sheer quantity that after a while, when you have given 150 or 200 speeches, trust me, I could give a speech 5 minutes from now to 50,000 people. It wouldn't bother me. 50,000 is a lot, but I don't know, 1,000 people. So I think it just comes with repetition. And, the so-called Malcolm Gladwell theory of 10,000 hours, where now you can blink to combine two of his books. It was sheer repetition. And, if if you do something long enough and hard enough and well enough and, with enough grit, eventually you will master it.
Yeah. Writing's also been a big part of your life. The author of 15 books. I guess, do you have any advice for someone looking to be a first-time writer? Or?
Sure. So first off, if you want to be a writer, buy a book called If You Want to Write by Brenda Hewlett. Now, she was a writing instructor at University of Minnesota. Now, if you're not wanting to be a writer, you want to be a videographer, artist, chef, musician, also buy that book. It's not just for writers. The word she used is writer, but you could be any creative function if you want to make movies, if you want to cook, if you want to make graffiti, whatever it is. So I recommend that book. Now, specifically for a writer, I think my recommendation is that, first of all, you write a book when you have something to say. A lot of people, they say, I'm going to write a book because it'll help me with my consulting, positioning me as a thought leader, as a guru, increase my consulting fees and speaking fees, blah, blah, blah. And that's all totally, utterly bullshit. The reason why you should write a book is because you have something to say, not because a book is a means to an end. A book should be an end in and of itself. So when you have this burning desire to say what you have to say, then you write a book. It's not because you want to get consulting gigs. And that's number one. Number two is you got to write every day. Even if it's a page, you write every day. Now, having said that, I will tell you that that's one of the hardest things to do because like many writers, I have this thing like I want to do everything else. And when all of that is clear, I can write. Well, guess what? That day never comes. So the fact that I've written 15 books is a minor miracle.
Yeah. You started podcasting, I believe, December of 2019 with the Remarkable People podcast.
Yep.
Do you want to talk about how you got into that and what you're trying to do there?
Well, I had written a book called Wise Guy, and I was on a book tour, and I was meeting with many podcasters, and I asked some of them, so how does podcasting work? I make 52 episodes a year. Well, how do you make money? I sell ads. Well, how many ads do you sell? I sell one before the thing starts. I sell one in the middle. I sell one at the end. And how much do you sell those ads for? $25,000 for the first one, $15,000 for the second one, $10,000 for the third one. So I can do the math in my head. So I say, you're telling me you make $50,000 an episode? You do 52 episodes a year? I said, yeah. I said, why am I writing books? Why am I writing books? I should just be a podcaster. And also podcasting afforded me the ability to, it came out to this because of the pandemic that I didn't have to travel, right? So with a speech, you got to get on an airplane 50 times a year. With podcasting, particularly post-pandemic, I have not done an in-person interview for my podcast since maybe March of 2020.
Yeah.
So, and at first, I got to tell you, I thought there's no way that this is going to work because you need to be there with the person. You need to look into her eyes. You need to, sense the emotion. You need to build this trust, blah, blah, blah. I'm telling you, you can do all of that with, what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
What we're doing right now. Listen, there is no way in hell I would fly to Boston to do this interview. Now, maybe you would fly to me, but I would not fly to you. I would not take 2 or 3 days out of my life to do a podcast interview.
Yeah.
So, hopefully your audience says, it still was human and warm and real, even though they weren't sitting next to each other.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess, for a lot of the younger people in listening to this, you're going to be viewed as a wise person,
That's
given your life experience and business success. Do you have any regrets or any mistakes that you think as you look back on your life?
I quit Apple twice and turned Steve Jobs down once. That's 3 mistakes. I was offered the opportunity to interview for the second CEO position of Yahoo, and I turned that down because it was too far to drive. So if you just took those four, that's probably $2.5 billion right there. So, I've evolved my thinking to always say yes and worry about it later.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, and you know what? Just coming back to my podcast. Okay. So hopefully the listener thinks that they have received some wisdom from me during this podcast. But I will tell you that my Remarkable People podcast, myself and my team, we are on a mission to make people who listen to our podcast remarkable. And so we reach out to people like Jane Goodall, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Christy Yamaguchi, Steve Wozniak, Scott Galloway, Angela Duckworth, David Ocker, Bob Cialdini. I could just go down the line. We're on episode of 140. And I guarantee you, if you listen to my podcast, not from me, you will get the wisdom and lessons and hindsights of truly remarkable people that will help you become remarkable too.
Yeah. 100%. I guess today, what motivates you, and what's driving you?
What's driving me is really I think my podcast is the best work I've ever done. And I want to leave a record. I want to leave something of great value so that someday when somebody wants to someday when someone wants to learn about Jane Goodall, there's a lot to read about her. But I will tell you that my interview of her, I bet you, is one of the best sources of information about Jane Goodall, like what makes her tick. And so I want to do that 52 times a year so that forever people will be able to listen to my podcast or read the transcripts and glean the knowledge of these remarkable people. That's at the end of my life, which may not be too far away because I'm 67. I want people to say that Guy empowered me. Guy empowered me. He made me remarkable, sometimes with his investment, sometimes with his employment, sometimes with his advice, sometimes with his speech, sometimes with his book, sometimes with his podcast, but he empowered me.
Yeah. Do you remember your last conversation with Steve before he passed?
Steve Jobs?
Yeah.
No. Listen, honestly, I was not in his inner circle. Okay. Because, like when Steve Jobs came looking for you, 90% of the time, it was something to be afraid of. So, no news is good news.
Yeah. Well, Guy, I guess one last question is,
yes.
Everybody is going to view you as successful, and everybody that's young is trying to become successful. I guess what are your thoughts on that, and what our mental mindset should be if we're in our early to mid 20s or 30s?
Yeah. Well, I think your mindset should be, first of all, many people will tell you, pursue your passion, right? Pursue your passion and, find something you love to do. I will tell you something very different. I think that you should open your mind to various things that interest you. And it could be software, hardware, writing, podcasting, making music, whatever. So you have an open mind, and as things pop up on your radar and they interest you, pursue them until you decide that you're not interested in it, or you can never be good at it, or you can never make money. In a perfect world, you'll find something that you like to do, that you're good at, and you can make money. That's the golden Venn diagram. And to do that, you're going to have to drill a lot of holes, to use another metaphor. And so I think the advice said, pursue your passion. So a lot of people hear that and say, okay, so I'm 25 and I haven't found my passion yet. I haven't found this thing that obsesses me. I haven't found this thing that I'm willing to dedicate my life to. I'm a failure. I'm 25. You know what? I discovered podcasting at 64. Okay. So it interested me and it became a passion. So, the test is, does something interest you? Then explore it. Don't think that you're going to be just dumbstruck, fall off the wagon, overcome with joy one day when you discover your passion. That's not how it works.
Yeah. Is
Okay?
Is there anything else that you would like to
That's
say
it.
on life?
That
That's,
listen to my podcast. Don't be stubborn. Just listen to my podcast. I promise you. And I'm not telling you that I provide a lot of wisdom in that. I'm telling you my guests do.
yeah. Well, Guy, I just want to thank you for coming on. For
My
anyone that wants to support you, I guess is the best way to tune into the podcast.
That is the best way.
Mhm.
Not only tune into the podcast, but when you are blown away with the value it adds to your life, I want you to evangelize it because it is good news.
Yeah. Well, Guy,
Okay?
I want to acknowledge you and thank you for coming on. I really appreciate the opportunity.
All the best.
Thank you.
All the best to you and yours.